Hello and thanks for watching. This is Jennifer McGuire. So one of the questions that I get the most emails about is how to best layer images from stamp layering sets. Now these are stamp sets where there are 3 or 4 images that are meant to layer on top of each other to create something realistic. And oftentimes you really got to make sure it's layered perfectly or close to perfect in order for the image to work in the end. I have shared many different methods for getting good stamp layering, but today's is by far the most accurate. This method does require a stamping tool such as the MISTI. However, in a few days, I have a video coming on how to do stamp layering without a MISTI, so stay tuned for that. So there are a couple variations of this stamp layering method I'm going to share with you today, so I have lots of examples. Let's start with this realistic looking pear. I will be doing my stamping on a die cut from this Pink and Main thin fishtail banner die set. That's the one on the left. I'll be using this set and the large fishtail banner die set that you see on the right throughout this video. I like the fun shape and the faux stitching it gives. I will also be using the Kitchen Sink Stamps Pears stamp set. Now, I went over to the Kitchen Sink Stamps website after my friend Lydia told me about them, and I tell you, they had so many great, realistic-looking layering stamp sets. I just went to town and I bought a bunch of them, and I thought I'd use them for today's technique examples. I'm going to freeze the screen here so that you can get a closer look. What I found unique about the kitchen sink stamps is 2 things. You can see the index sheet, which is that printed clear piece to the right, is separate from the stamp set, and it's printed in color. Most stamp sets that you get, the stamps come stuck to the index sheet and you just remove them, and the index sheet is printed in black. So that's unique for today's stamps. However, the technique I'm going to show you, you can do with any stamp set. Just when you see me using the colored index sheet in this video, just pretend it's like the black printed index sheet that you get with other stamp sets. You just want to remove the stamps to do this method. I'll be starting with the large pear image, and there are 4 layers to that. Now I'm using the MISTI stamping tool today, which is my favorite of the stamping tools. Any stamping tool would work for this. This just happens to be the one that I've always used because it's worked great for me. Now I am just taping some white paper in here only for your benefit. It just would be easier to see this technique without having the grid on the screen. So you do not need to do that when you do this technique at home. I just did it for the video. Now I went ahead and stamped on my die cuts a sentiment from the Sunny Studio Fruit Cocktail stamp set. It says, "You're perfect," and I'll do all my stamping on these die cuts. I'm going to start by putting a little bit of tape runner on the back of this, just so it'll hold in place for the technique. Okay, so I have my index sheet here. Remember, any index sheet for the stamp set is fine, even if the images are in black. And I'm kind of planning out where that first one's going to go. See how I have the first layer of the pear, and I'm lining it up on my die cut just to imagine that I have enough room for that above the sentiment and also a leaf above that. So I'm using the index sheet to help me plan out my stamping. Okay, so once I'm sure of where I want it, I just want it a little bit above the "You're perfect." I'm just going to line up that bottom image. This is the solid most image of the pear, and it also had the number 1 on it on the package. And I'm going to stamp this with my lightest ink. So I'm closing the door of my MISTI stamping tool and stamping that with Citrus Bursts from Altenew. Now, I'm a big believer in making many cards at once. You don't have to do this, but since my stamps are ready, I might as well. So I went ahead and stamped that on all of my die cuts. Next, I've lined up the first layer of the leaf image, and I'm stamping that with Altenew Bamboo. Any inks would work for this. One important step when doing stamp layering is to dry your inks in between each layer. Even though I'm using a dye ink that dries to the touch, it does take some time to absorb into the paper and settle. If I went ahead and stamped 2 images on top of each other without drying first, they kind of wick a little bit and you don't get as crisp layering. So I do like to dry it in between. You can skip this if you want, but if you really want to get the best results, it's worth the effort. Okay, so now I put a little bit more glue on the back of this, and now it's time to do the technique. I'm taking the index sheet, and see this is image number 2, the next layer. And watch, I'm lining it up with the stamping that I've already done on the die cut. It's very easy to look through the index sheet and line it up, even easier when the index sheet is black printed like most are. While keeping that die cut lined up, I'm putting the index sheet right into the corner of my MISTI, pressing the die cut down, and then removing the index sheet. This seems a little weird at first, but I promise it'll work great. Now I'm taking the negative space of that die cut and just taping it around it. That's because I'm doing several die cuts and I can switch them out. So I just have that negative space there. Now it's time to apply the stamp to our MISTI, and this is the easiest way to do it. You take that stamp image with the stamp side down and line it up with the index sheet. See how it's lined up there? It's very easy to look through the stamp and line it up with the index sheet. I then put my index sheet back into the corner of the MISTI, close the door on the MISTI, and now I remove the index sheet and I can start stamping, and I'll know that it is perfectly lined up. This time I'm using Altenew Limeade ink, but remember, any inks would work for this. Now I'm going to switch that die cut out with the next one and just pop it into the negative space. Now you don't need to use that negative space die cut if you're only doing one at a time, which you'll see me do later in this video. But for this, I'm doing a bunch, so that die cut negative space was very helpful. Okay, let's now do the second layer of the leaf. For this, I'm taking my index sheet, and you see number 2 of the leaf. It's got the little number next to it. I'm going to line that up with the stamped leaf that I have on my die cut. So I'm going to just look through it and line it up. Holding those together, I'm going to put this into the corner of my MISTI, and then press the die cut in place, making sure that it stays lined up. Now I can remove the index sheet and put the negative space around it. Now this may look complicated at first, but once you've done it a few times, you'll see that it works like a charm every time. Okay, now I'm going to take that index sheet, line up the stamp on the index sheet, now put that index sheet back into the corner of my MISTI and close the door. And now we have our stamp perfectly lined up for the second layer of the leaf. It does take an extra step to use the index sheet to help with lining up these images, but it is so much easier to line up images using the index sheet than the stamps themselves. I promise you it's a huge improvement. Okay, after I've done the second layer of the leaves, let's move on to the third layer on the pears, and I'm going to make sure that all of that ink is dry first. Okay, let's go to the third layer of the pear. So we've got that 3 pear there. I'm going to line that up with the stamping that we've already done. I'm going to hold that index sheet against my die cut, put the index sheet in the corner of the MISTI, and then press down that die cut. I have a little adhesive on the back. And then I have my negative space that I'm going to put right around that. That'll allow me to do several die cuts in the same spot. Okay, now we line up the third pear image with the third image on the index sheet. So you can see how I can look through and line it up. It's pretty cool because when you line up a stamp with the index sheet, it kind of, the color pops when you get it lined up perfectly. It's really easy to tell. So now I'm stamping this with Altenew Lime ink, and I have my third layer of stamping. And I'll go ahead and repeat that with my other die cuts. All right, let's move on to the third layer of the leaf. So I'm lining up my stamped leaf with number 3 leaf image on the index sheet, putting that into the corner of my stamping tool and making sure I have it lined up. It shifted there, so I just relined it up, press that die cut down into my MISTI. Now I'm putting the negative space around that so I can do lots of die cuts after this one. I'll line up the third leaf image with my index sheet. Put that in the corner of my MISTI and close the door, and now we're ready to stamp, and it'll be perfectly lined up each time. This time I'm using Altenew Olive ink, and I stamped all of the leaves this way. At this point, I felt like my pear was a little too green. There still is another layer to do, but I wanted to add some warmth towards the bottom of the pear. So I'm going to go back and change my image. I do stuff like this a lot. If you're not real happy with the color that you're doing with your layering, don't worry. You don't have to start over. You can change it up. So I'm going back to the second image, and I'm going to stamp that again, but not completely. So here you see I'm lining up my image, putting the negative space around it, lining up the second stamp with the index sheet, putting it into my MISTI, and closing it. Now, instead of inking that stamp fully with another ink, I'm just using an ink blending tool to apply a little bit of Gina K Peach Bellini ink to the bottom edge of that stamp. So you'll see I'm using an inking tool to dab some color on, and I do a few layers. By using an inking tool, I'm only putting a little bit of ink down so I get a subtle peach color towards the bottom of my pear. This is a great way to add even more color to your stamped images, whether they're layering stamps or not. Off screen, I went ahead and added the fourth layer to the pear. There weren't any more layers for the leaves. And now it's time to turn these into cards. I kept these cards very simple, but changed up the design on each. For the background, I used the Altenew Dotted Swirls Debossing die, which I've used many times. I am a big fan of this die, as it doesn't cut a border. It just adds little piercing. And I did that on the front of a Whisper Gina K cardstock note card that I created. You can see here how realistic that pear looks and how all of my layers were lined up nicely because I used that index sheet trick along with my MISTI stamping tool. So I created a bunch of note cards here. You can see how I put the die cut in a different place on each card. That's one of the things I like about die cut banners like this is you can use them in many different positions on your card to get different looks. I also like that the faux stitching on that banner die and the debossing in the background add some interest to this very simple card design. Okay, let's move on to my next example. This is very similar to the last. However, this time I'm going to do some second generation stamping for some additional card samples. For this one, I used the Kitchen Sink Berries stamp set. As you can see, there are many different images on here. There's the strawberries, actually 2 different sizes, blueberries, raspberries, lots of different leaves. For these first cards, I'm just going to do the larger strawberry. So off screen, I created a bunch of white die cuts using the My Favorite Things Elegant Rectangle die set. I kept the negative space as I used on my last example since I'm making a lot of stamp die cuts. I want to make sure that my strawberry is centered, so I'm lining up that number 1 strawberry, the solid one there, with the center of that negative space. I'm holding it together, and then I'm going to put the corner of my index sheet into the corner of my MISTI and press that all down. So now I've taped that negative space in its perfect position to do my stamping. After I put my first die cut in place, it's time to line up our strawberry stamp. So I'm taking the strawberry image and lining it up with the strawberry on our index sheet. I'll put the index sheet into the corner of our MISTI, and then I will close the MISTI door to transfer the stamp onto the door. Now we can stamp our first strawberry. I'm going to use Hero Art's Fresh Peach ink, which is a great light red ink. On my first die cut, I'm going to stamp it directly. Then I'll take that die cut out and put in my next one. And without re-inking the stamp, I'm going to stamp again. And this gives me a second generation, a lighter image. I might as well not waste that ink. And this way, I'm going to create a darker strawberry on some die cuts and a lighter strawberry on others. You don't have to do this second generation, but I think it's fun and it gives a really new look for it. So I'm on to my next die cut. I've inked up my stamp. I stamp it down for first generation. Then I switch out the die cut and I stamp again without re-inking for the second generation. And I'm going to repeat this process with all of the layers, each time stamping for the first and the second generation. The second generation will be much, much lighter, but it will turn out to be a beautiful image in the end. Now let's do the leaf for the top of the strawberry. I put my index sheet into my MISTI, and this time I'm lining up my die cut behind it. And so that the leaf on the index sheet lines up with my stamped strawberry. You can see how it's lined up there. I can remove my index sheet, put the negative space in place around it. Make sure you have tape there to hold it in place. Now I'll line up the leaf stamp with the leaf on the index sheet. Put it back into the corner of my stamping tool, close the door, and now we can stamp the leaf image on top. Using Gina K Key Lime ink, I'm stamping my first generation on one die cut. And then without re-inking, I'm stamping the second generation on the other die cut. And I'll continue to do this for all of my die cuts. By the way, on this example and my last example, I did this layering technique on die cuts. If you want to learn how to do it just on a piece of cardstock, stay tuned. One of my next examples will show that. Okay, now it's time for the second layer of our strawberry. I'm lining up the index sheet for the number 2 strawberry with our stamping on the die cut. Super easy to line up this way. I'll hold that together, put it in the corner of our MISTI, making sure that it stays lined up, and then I'll press that down, remove our index sheet, put the negative space around it. Then we will take our second strawberry stamp and line it up with the second strawberry on our index sheet. Again, it's very easy to look through it and make sure that image lines up. It's really cool how it looks like it pops in place when you have it lined up correctly. The key is to get your face over the image to look through it completely. Then I will put it in the corner of my MISTI, close the MISTI door, and now it's time to stamp. This time I'm using Gina K Red Hot ink, inking it up and stamping on my first die cut, not inking it this time and just stamping it on my second. And you can see how the second generation image is starting to form. Although it's lighter than the first, it gives another option and is a great way to make more cards at once. Now it's time to line up the second image for the leaf. So I'm lining it up with the stamping on my die cut, put the index sheet in the corner of the MISTI, put the die cut negative space around it, line up the second stamp of the leaf with the second stamp on the index sheet, close it into our MISTI, and start stamping, first and second generation. This time I'm using Hero Art's Fresh Lawn Green ink. So you can see how once you start doing this a few times, you get into a rhythm of lining up these stamped images. And you'll find that this technique will give you very accurate layering with your images. Now, I know this isn't for everyone. Oftentimes, close is good enough, and I'm a big fan of that. However, I know some people like to get it as perfect as possible because I get a lot of emails about it. So if you're one of those people, you can definitely try this technique, and I bet it'll work for you. So I lined up the third layer of the strawberry, and here I'm inking it up with Hero Art's Red Royal ink, stamping the first generation on my first die cut, and without re-inking, stamping the second generation on my next die cut. You can see how that second generation, as you get darker inks on there, it starts to show up more. So I'm going to skip ahead. I did the fourth layer to the strawberry and the third layer to the leaves, and I end up with 3 first generation stamped pieces and 3 second generation stamped pieces. The second generation stamping is great for soft backgrounds, but in this case I made it a focal point. Okay, now for sentiment, I used the Altenew Simple Fruit stamp set. I really like the clever sentiments on here that match up with fruit. And I picked out one that says, "Have a sweet day." I'm using my MISTI Creative Corners. That's that L-shaped piece there. And that helps me to make sure that I'm lining up my sentiments straight and centered on my die cut. I find that tool very helpful. And I'm stamping that with Altenew Obsidian Black ink, which is my favorite black ink for crisp sentiments. Okay, so here are the finished cards, super simple to assemble. I created a colored die cut to match the stamping using the same My Favorite Things Elegant Frames die set that has lots of different sizes in the same shape, so you can create a mat very easily. You can see how the second generation images are soft, but still are beautiful. They actually kind of look like they glow thanks to the layering stamping. And here's a comparison between the first generation stamping and the second generation stamping. By the way, on the back of several of these cards, I created a white die cut using this leaf die that coordinates with the Altenew Leaf Clusters stamp set. I just die cut it from white cardstock twice and then glued that to kind of peek out from behind our die cut in the center. That just adds a little interest and texture to the background, something very simple to do for simple cards like these. Now, using that same Kitchen Sink Stamps Berries stamp set, I created some cards with the raspberry images. I'm not showing that process in the video here because this video is long enough as is, but I wanted to show you how realistic the berry images are too. I used the exact same method that I did for the strawberries, where I used the index sheet to line up the layers. I again used the My Favorite Things Elegant Frame dies. And for the sentiments, I teamed up the Hero Arts Thank You Messages stamp set for the thank you portion of the sentiment. Then I used that Altenew fruit stamp set from before to stamp Berry Much underneath it. Now also for the background, I wanted to have some texture, subtle texture, so I did some more white die cuts. This time, however, I use layered white die cuts. Most of my leaves are from this Altenew Wild Rose 3D die set. You can see there are 3 dies that you can layer together to create a layered leaf. So I die cut all 3 from white cardstock, glued them together, and have them peeking out from behind our focal point die cut image. I really like the look of those layered white die cuts against that white note card. And by the way, for these cards, I just did the first generation stamping. The only cards in today's video where I did the second generation version are the strawberry ones I showed you. Okay, on my next few cards, I used a kitchen sink stamp set that is perfect for creating sand, grass, sky, snow, water, whatever you want. So I did sand on the last card here, I did the grass. And I wanted to just show you those grounds before we move on to the rest of the cards. For this, I use the kitchen sink stamp set called Rolling Hills, and that's the one that you see here. Now, I didn't use the layering trick with the index sheet for this because it's very easy to line up. It wasn't necessary to add in that extra step, but I did want to show you how to layer it and how it really becomes such a realistic looking image in the end. So I have the bottom first layer and I'm inking that up with Altenew Limeade ink. It'll probably look splotchy at first, that's okay. Most dye inks do, but as you give it time to dry, you'll see that it softens and evens out. I'm going to create a bunch of grounds this way, so I have them on hand because I can use this little grassy scene along with critter images or other things that I have. So after I stamped my first layer and I heat set it so it was dry, it's time to come in with the second layer. As I mentioned, this is easy to line up. You just line up that top edge. And then I'll stamp that with the Altenew Lime ink. And by the way, look at how nicely that first layer smoothed out after it dried. Okay, so I'll go ahead and stamp this layer on each of my backgrounds. And then we can move in and add the third layer. So you can see how my grass is forming. However, you could do this with soft brown inks to create sand, soft blue inks to create ocean, or soft white and gray inks to create snow. Next, I wanted to create a quick, soft sky. To do so, I'm using a blending brush. These are new from Tailored Expressions. They're all the same size and they're color-coded, which makes it excellent for keeping track of what colors you use with which brush. I'll still use my other blending brushes for the other size brushes, but for this basic size, I really like these. I'm masking off the ground on this one. Then I'm coming in with Altenew Sea Breeze ink and my blending brush and putting a soft, uneven layer of blue ink across the top. So notice I'm only doing blue in different areas so that the white shows through between. And then once you're done, you get what looks like a cloudy sky, a very soft cloudy sky. It is such an easy trick to do, something I like to do for skies, and you can stamp on top of it. Okay, so after I created some backgrounds with grass on the bottom and some with sand on the bottom, let's create some layered stamping on top. For my first one, I used the Kitchen Sink Stamps Palm Trees stamp set. I used the same technique that I did before of using the index sheet to help line up these images. I did this stamping off screen to save some time, but again, it's the same technique. I trimmed that piece down and added it to a Gina K Whisper note card that I created, and I used that Altenew Debossing die on the background. That Sentiment Miss You Friend is from the Altenew Leaf Clusters stamp set. I like how I was able to create a realistic sand, the sky behind it, and then the palm tree on top. Now before I show you more stamp layering, I just wanted to show you this other example I made. On this one I used both of the palm trees included in the stamp set and again stamped Miss You My Friend. Okay, let's do another example of using the index sheet to help line up your layering stamps. This time I created this realistic looking tree with the Kitchen Sinks Trees stamp set. There are 2 different layered trees in the set and I'll use both of them today. I stamped the first layer of the tree with Altenew Frayed Leaf ink and I'll heat set that. I'm going to do the technique a little differently this time. This time I'm going to put my inked or stamped piece into the corner of my MISTI and then lay the index sheet on top of that. So I have my stamped piece in the MISTI. I'm putting my index sheet lined up there so the second layer of the tree is lined up. See how perfect it lines up? I'm taping that index sheet in place, just using some temporary tape. Slid a piece of white cardstock behind there so I could see through. I'm lining up the second stamp with the second image on the index sheet. Close the MISTI. Now I can remove that piece of white cardstock and the index sheet, put my stamped piece into the corner of the MISTI, and then stamp that second layer with a slightly darker green ink. You can see how I got perfect lined up image because I used the index sheet. Once again, I'll heat set this to make sure it's dry. This helps to give nice crisp stamping. Now I'm taking the third image of that tree, lining it up with my stamped image, taping that index sheet in place so it doesn't move, sliding a piece of white cardstock behind there. That just makes it easier to line up that third stamp with the third image on the index sheet. Close the MISTI, remove the index sheet and the white cardstock, and then stamp with another darker green ink. This time I'm using Gina K Asparagus Green ink. Okay, so we have our fourth layer. Lining it up with our stamped image, tape it in place, tuck in a piece of white cardstock so we can see it better, line up our fourth image, close the MISTI, and then stamp that with Gina K Hot Chocolate ink. So you can do this method of using the index sheet either this way, where your stamped paper stays in the corner and you just move the index sheet around, or the first way I showed you where the index sheet stayed in the corner. Either way works, just whatever makes more sense to you. This index sheet trick was very helpful with this particular tree image. You really needed to get that lined up just right to get great results because there are tiny little branches in there. It was easy to do with the index sheet. So if you ever have a tough to layer stamp set, try this. And by the way, I did die cut that stamped piece with the Pink and Main fishtail banner die set. I also white heat embossed a sentiment from the Simon Says Stamp Leafy Frame stamp set. I've used this one many times before too. And on the background, I used the Altenew Swirls debossing die once again. Here is another example using all of the same products as the last one. This time I used the other tree from that tree stamp set. I used Altenew Maple Honey ink. Then I used Hero Art's Just Rust ink and Hero Art's Red Royal ink to create those beautiful fall leaves. Again, using that index sheet technique with the MISTI stamping tool was a lifesaver in getting great results with that tree. Okay, I have one last quick example for you. I did a bit of layered stamping and then just added a sentiment for a quick card. This is the Kitchen Sink Birch Trees stamp set. This is another one I had to buy because I thought it would be great for creating scene cards, but today I'm going to go with a simple look. I started by stamping the first layer of the trees with Hero Art's Fresh Lawn Green ink. Now I'm lining up the first layer of the branch or the trunk of the tree. It's a very light color here, but I can easily line it up with the index sheet. And I'm doing the same technique I did on my last example. I tape the index sheet in place. I tuck in a piece of white cardstock behind it just so I can see that trunk better. I line up the stamp on the index sheet, close that under the MISTI, remove the index sheet and white cardstock, and now I can stamp this. And I'm using Hero Art's Soft Sand ink. Now I'm lining up the second layer of the tree. So I'm lining up the index sheet with my stamping, and I'll repeat the process to add the second layer. I'm going to zoom in so you can see up close how easy it is to line up the stamp with the index sheet. Watch as I move it around. When it hits perfectly lined up, you can see how it just seems to pop into place. I'll freeze frame it here. See how all of the color is showing through the stamp? But when I move it a little bit, not all the color is showing. So see when I move it, you can really tell easily that you've lined the stamp up with the index sheet. And it's even more obvious when the index sheet is printed black. So I'll stamp this layer with Gina K Grass Green ink, and then we can move on to the next layer of the trunk. The reason I switch between the layers of the leaves and then I go stamp a layer of the trunk, then I go back and stamp another layer of the leaves is because it gives time for the ink to dry and absorb, and then I don't have to do any heat setting. It just saves me a bit of time. So I just continued to do the other layers of the leaves and the trunk until I had my completed image. All I did was trim that down and add that to a Hero Arts Pesto cardstock note card. And I added a simple sentiment to this. I feel like this is a perfect sympathy card. I don't know, for some reason I like simple sympathy cards. And this tree could be used for many different occasions, and you could create a great scene with it. And by the way, that sentiment is from that Simon Says Stamp Leafy Frame stamp set once again. Okay, so there you have a way of getting really good, accurate layering with your stamp layering sets. I hope this is helpful. It may look complex, but once you try it, I think you'll like it. If you are interested in the products that I feature in this video, they are linked below in my YouTube description, but go to my blog for more sources. I also have photos of these cards and more information there too. In the middle of the screen here are 2 other videos that show other ways of getting accurate stamp layering because everybody likes something a little bit different. You can also click subscribe there on the top left if you're interested. And thank you for hanging out with me today. I always appreciate it, and we'll see you again very soon.